terms of how you actually do your Zoom when you're delivering your workshops, or if you're facilitating a meeting or whatever. Some things to have a think about in terms of when you're hosting a Zoom meeting. So one of the things you want to have a think about is good practice to set your own protocols and guidelines for a virtual meeting. So they're like the same way you would actually do for if you were delivering a workshop, a class, or you're in a meeting, you would have some sort of kind of guidance, a kind of understanding. And one of the things that a lot of people talk about is like in day-to-day meetings that we have, there's a thing called a social contract, where you actually know the kind of protocol when you come into a classroom environment, but whereas when you're doing something virtually, people don't know that because you can't read people, you can't read the body language. So it's about maybe reiterating the kind of do's and don'ts, about what's acceptable and what's not. And it's just so that people know as well. And so likewise, if you're going to have a break, it's about setting the break time. So it's about having things in place like that. It's about setting them as well. If you try not to interrupt and stuff like that, and we'll do kind of questions at an appropriate time. Also as well, just like a normal meeting workshop, there are things you need to have a think about in order for the meeting to run smoothly. And good practices you need to maybe take on board or whatever, and over time you'll learn it as you go along. But one of the things you need to be aware of is when we do video calls like this, or video meetings, or video conferences, it has a very relaxed feel to it, and it's imperative that people still remember that it's still technically a business meeting. So, the danger is of people getting into the false sense of security when they think, I'm in the house, might get a wee glass of wine, or sitting there having a beer or whatever, and it's just like, that sends out a wrong message. But it's also as well, be mindful as well, if you're working with a group or a class or whatever, it's still people in their house. So it's try to be tactile about it when you're actually saying to them about it. So it's about being mindful of that, but that sends out in terms of a message. So when you're going to actually be delivering your workshop or you're hosting a meeting, set the date and time in advance in order for people to get time to save it and also get time to log into it, because a lot of people are still not familiar with Zoom. So really what they have to do is take that opportunity and maybe like practice it beforehand, because there's nothing worse when you say, right, we're meeting like in an hour, and you're thinking, I've never used Zoom before. So it's about giving people the plenty of time to actually get familiar with it. Also, one of the things to think about as well is about sending out the details, the meeting link and the password, only to attendees that have registered for your meeting. And this is one of the things you need to be careful, and that kind of looks into the security of the session as well. Some people might think, oh, I've got the details, I'll send it out to everybody as well. And before you know it, you've got people coming on, you don't even know who they are. So it's about being mindful and be careful as well that the people that are attending your session, your workshop or your meeting, is people that's actually registered for it, and you know who they are. One of the things as well, again, is about sticking to a plan, stick to an agenda. So you would be normally doing a session plan or whatever if you're doing a workshop, or if you're doing a meeting, you would have an agenda there as well, and it's important about keeping to that. Okay, so in terms of other things as well, I would encourage people as well and email the attendees copies of any handouts a day or two prior to the meeting. So that way they can maybe like print them off or whatever. Sometimes it's not appropriate. Sometimes you need to do it like after the session, but it's always good practice, I think, to do it beforehand, so people get to see it and all that, and they know it's relevant. And if it's specifically relevant in terms of if you're going to be hosting a meeting, or you're going to be doing a session with a workshop or whatever, when an activity is relative to what you're doing, get the information out to them beforehand. And because of the kind of nature that we're in, if you can try and email it to them, a day or two in advance, that gives them plenty of time, but at the same time, it's no too far away from it as well. Now, some things to have a think about as well. People always talk about, oh, you get free Zoom, you can use it. One of the things you need to be aware of is free Zoom normally only provides 40 minutes, right? But if you're going to be delivering a session within that, I would encourage you not to do it, because what happens is, if you're going to be doing a 40-minute session, by the time you get people joining it, that's about 10 minutes it's taking to actually get them into the meeting, get them set up, get their cameras on, get them active. You'll get somebody turning up late, you'll get all that going on, and then before you know it, you've actually technically only done about 20 minutes after everybody's had that wee thing as well, where they're, oh, it's good seeing you, how are you? And you're trying to settle people in. So try not to use the free Zoom. One of the things as well to be aware of when you're doing the Zoom is about trying to ask attendees to log in. If you've got a set time for your session, it's about saying to them, look, can I get you to join in and be in the waiting room 5 minutes prior to the meeting starting, so that if you say a 7 o'clock start, that way you're starting at 7 o'clock, because there's nothing worse and off-putting when you start getting people coming in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes or whatever, and then it's like you're having to reiterate to people or whatever. So it's just about being mindful. The exact same you would for any meeting physically, people come in for the same time. One of the things you want to think about as well is about using the camera. Like this is the one where you'll sometimes get into a Zoom and you'll have somebody sitting there and they don't have the camera on, and you might get where they're not comfortable in doing that. But what you have to be aware of as well is that for your security, you kind of need to encourage them to maybe put the camera on. If they're still not that comfortable with it, at least allow them the opportunity to speak and just explain who they are, just to clarify that it is the people that you know who it is. One of the things I do say though is, like, if you were in a physical face-to-face meeting with people, would you have somebody turning up, sitting in the corner of the room and they're just covered up completely, they're not engaging or anything, you don't know who they are? Would you allow them to sit there in that room, or would you get to a point you would ask them, who are you? Can you identify yourself? And then if they're not able to identify themselves, they don't want to actively take part, then you'd be thinking about, okay, might want to ask them to leave at this point. So it's really about being mindful of that when you're using something like Zoom. It's about thinking about your security. And I do say this to people: if you're not familiar who they are and you've got concerns about who they are, don't be afraid to remove them. If you've got some kind of concerns about who they are. One of the things as well is about thinking about, remember, it is a business meeting, and it's very easy, again, get into that thing where it can look quite informal. And it's about any informal chats that people do within these sessions, in these meetings. I would try and encourage them to do it at the very end, because it also takes the pressure off the person like chairing the session, delivering the meeting, where, and it's also, it makes it easier as well. If you get a session, or if you're doing a meeting where you actually need to take notes and take minutes, and it kind of keeps a kind of process as well, because what people can do as well, but they can spend the duration of the workshop or the session working on the activities, and then they have that bit of free time at the end where they can talk to each other, because they've not seen each other for a while. Also as well, as we've already kind of mentioned, Zoom has a function where you can raise your hand. So if you want to kind of ask a question as well, and people want to ask questions when in the middle of conversations or whatever dialogue, they can raise a hand on it, and they can also text questions as they go along as well. And it's actually really good if somebody's not very comfortable if they're not good with speaking or whatever. So it's don't be afraid to embrace that. When you're going to be delivering a session, I would try and encourage people to get familiar with it beforehand, because I know if you've never used Zoom before, it's the thought of doing it, it's like, wow. And even myself, this time last year, we were just trying to kind of come to terms with the thought of like using Zoom. Like many people, we know a lot of it, but we're no experts in it, and there's a lot of things we're still learning as we go along. So don't feel like, they know what they're doing, and it's only through experience you get to know the basics of how to do it. Well, so what I would say to you, firstly, for yourself, I would actually take the time, get familiar with it. And the same as well with everybody that's going to be attending it. If you can even do a wee informal meeting or whatever with them, a tester even, before you do the actual session. But whatever you do, don't leave it 5 minutes prior, because what happens is you'll get inundated. You say to people, we're going to be doing the Zoom at 7 o'clock, have a trial well in advance, blah, blah, blah. You can be guaranteed you're going to get people 5 minutes beforehand coming to you. And that's stressful when you're sitting there with like potentially 5, 6 people who have never done it before, trying to talk them through it, and it delays your session. So even if you're going to maybe do a few weeks or whatever, you could do like one session, just a trial, and that's just an informal. So this is really the kind of opportunity now for any questions, and I'm going to stop.